Wars is a continuation and final summation of the Silent War and the Spoken War. What I'm about to divulge is information about incursions in space and time, galactic warfare from the war in heaven that came here, and a prelude to a future and upcoming war, the final war, a war that this world has never seen before, called the Battle of Armageddon. Before this takes place, certain events had to transpire, timelines became entangled, sorted out, and optimal outcomes processed and overcome, so the lower adverse forces of cause and effect that sought to collapse the whole system would be subjugated to their own cruel and inhumane forms of malaise and kicked off the Earth's terrain. One such group of beings came to Earth and called themselves the Society. These consisted of ancient little G's, gods of ancient antediluvian times. They spoke a droning serpent tongue that had a mind-numbing and paralyzing effect on the parts of the brain. The Annunaki, as some called them. Some of these serpent beings were sealed into the earth in the antediluvian times and went and made tunnels underneath the earth, which now became the d.u.m.b.s, the deep underground military bases. They came with skyships and tools and frequency fences, wishing to enslave the human populace, but their plans were thwarted by higher orders of heavenly hosts that made them cease and desist, stop hunting the elect and killing the children of God. They wished to return to take one last shot at the Lord of hosts, God Almighty, Abba Yah, Father Elohim, the great I Am, the one who was and is to come. These beings have already been given over to their strong delusion. They have recruited many and nests in the stars currently. They are bottom feeders in the heavenly hierarchies. Their full measure of sin and wretched existence will be approaching its final end. Deep outer darkness is reserved for them. The Greys and Draco vessels were made in collaboration and help with the Nazi scientists who were brought to America under the guise of Project Paperclip. They wanted to create an army for demonic entities to walk the face of the earth again and take over the malleable minds of the government and military. Many military personnel fought hard to stay in their fully human mind when they came, but they were overcome and allowed their brain halves to meld and mesh with the Anunnaki time decapitulation and frequency harness systems connected to a scarlet ibis bird mother they venerated and is likened to the Red Queen in the movie Resident Evil. The days of 80s X-Men and other kids fighting the return of the old gods, Anunnaki overlords, ships in the woods, human mutiny on MOntauk. The chosen originals lasted to prepare them for the last and final battle for Terra Earth, into a new celestial kingdom without parasitic invasions, tears from the garden. The harvest will commence. Look to the days of future past and future days. The present unmasks and revelation pouring out of heaven's windows. It was like less human presence, body snatchers, but not all love was lost out there. It was called Rainbow MK Ultra Umbrella Projects Hydra Umbra Clearance. These fallen creatures nest in the stars, and they find nests in the strata of the earth to leave their mark and burrow into. One such place was MOntauk, which spread and whose influence affected many other places on earth, and children were taken off-world to other systems and never seen again here. Me and a few other kids became skilled and courageous enough to stand up to them and save children from going with them. And they had so many, they let us go and pushed us over with their hands, which were like clubs to us, and now got on board with their ship and would go on missions. Their touch was sickening, so it would take us hours to get vibrationally right and be able to think straight sometimes if they touched you. Some children were replaced, and clones ended up infiltrating their lives with sinister objectives. The Anunnaki ship was cloaked in the woods of Camp Hero by the village compound and marked with 2 large rods keeping anyone out, which served as an entry gate. You could walk in the trail in the woods and see them through the cloaking technology and see them boarding children onto their ship with large Venus flytrap-looking wands. The energy they emitted felt like heavy iron, but it was used in frequency and vibration, as they do not emit organic light. So these beings use ancient techniques of brain frequency scrambling and lower base frequency vibration pulses, sounds, scalar wave technology, and grid entrapment systems at the base of your skull. Eventually, they wanted everything to be hooked up to their mainframe AI motherboard, and they put different hubs all over the camp and black spiny antennas all throughout the camp to disrupt any pure human thought or signal, so you could barely even hear your own thoughts. It was like a static field at first, but then you'd start to see colors and patterns emitted from their minds, wand staffs, and all types of gadgets, bars, gates, and structures they would continually build in desperate attempts to control anyone or any living thing that they came into contact with. That is their neurosis. But what they feared the most is not being able to read into something or control it. We were taken there to their lair as children. It had a watchtower that was run by a general of the army who was a kind man and was desperately trying to fight for his mind. As the closer and more time he spent with the Anunnakis, he developed their sickness and couldn't block them out and spiritually fend himself. They used reprogrammable matter, and you could see it in his veins. I gave him my allegiance in the tower room with the American flag waving boldly behind him in the window, and knew this was a secret war that I would never forget, no matter how bad they tried to erase it, because it would leave scars on my soul. I saluted him. I could see the green energy in his face slowly infecting him each time we talked and reported. I prayed for him that he'd be able to be strong enough to withstand, but he just allowed the abductions to keep happening and children to be taken on their ships that was cloaked in the woods. So one night, me and 11 decided we know how to block out their frequencies. We could block them with their hands and our bodies sometimes, but this time in the deep neck of the woods, they had some staffs and sent electroshocks through you right to your heart, especially if they touched that area. We'd still get up though, and we'd be as courageous as lions sometimes. The shocks hurt and they'd knock you to the ground, but we tried as hard as we could at first and got better at holding onto kids' legs and trying to stop them from taking us off planet. We would get stunned by their weapons, and they used scalar energy fields that got uploaded into grids eventually, but at first they were weak. We were taken in their ships and saw kids die, and were not harmed, though, ourselves. They kept upping the tech, and at the end they threw the best tech they possibly had at us, and it still didn't kill us. They kept harnessing more and more energy from the area and from the feeding grounds because they can't produce their own energy or even enough energy for other ships without stealing it from other civilizations. We felt like rag dolls getting hit with the staff and our minds tranced out and being carried and drug away by two of the Anakin. There was an initial processing center building on the premises, and it was a large white house with a connecting partition in the front of the tower and the identical duplex version on the other side, which was off limits. Their plan was to make copies of us from the beginning and manipulate us into their games and lies and shadow plays. I was brought there by my grandfather, and in the living room where they had all of us stripped naked and put our clothes by the door and shoes. Dave Morrow, one of the Hulk program kids, was the biggest kid there, and they had him stand in the middle of the circle. And all the kids surrounded him, and he crossed his arms and would spin and throw as many kids off of him as possible. I was so little I got pushed back, and my brother pushed me in front of him twice, but they had already separated the strong ones, and I didn't want to get left behind, so I was scared to get separated, so my brother, in desperation, put a shoe on the floor between us. And we had learned this skill from our grandfather, and he played a silver harmonica on a black chair, and we both had two little ones in our pockets, so when I played a note, I'd hear like a buzzing around my head and feel this energy around me and trance out. And this was our secret, so when he said it was okay to do it, then I did. So I was nervous, and my brother looked at me and said, "It's okay, Arua, show them what you can do." So I concentrated more and then took the shoelace out, and it was put on the floor between us, and concentrated my energy, and then we both held our hands out, and we felt a ball of energy between us, and the shoelaces moved. Then we lifted the shoe up after that, and then they had me do it alone by myself. But in showing this technique, it was the worst mistake of my life, because after that day, the Nazis kept me, and then I slept upstairs with my grandfather, and the next morning, if I observed something or made a notation about my environment, my grandfather or any of the old men would tell me something completely different and make me mad. Like if you knew the curtains were red, they would make you tell them that they were gray. They would tell me everything was different and try to dissociate me from any pictorial memory, trying to make you second guess yourself all the time. Then a black shiny car would pull up to the end of the walkway between the two rows of these tall trees, and there was like 10 trees, like tall hedge bushes, and I'd get in the back seat of a black car between my grandfather and this mysterious old man with white hair, and he was like a KFC colonel looking man and sounded magical, and I could tell he was acting though. He wanted us to trust him, and he had a toy in his hand, and it was one of those old school Fisher-Price See and Say farm animal toys. So he spun it around, and with a string he pulled it out, and we went through all the farm animals. And then he changed quickly and pulled a gun out of his pocket and told me he was going to kill me if I ever said anything about this place. And then had like a little powder in the silk fabric and would blow a puff at me when I leaned in close to him. And it was red, so I would start laughing, and then his face would get distorted, and the See and Say I'd hear in the background, and everything would spiral and spin out right in front of me before I'd pass out, and my grandfather's hand would catch me right on my chest and lay me down on the old man's lap after that. And, after he would read to you the old MacDonald Had a Farm story. So they would drive and stop in the circle driveway and talk in a non-human language. And I was still recording all the information of my environment and surroundings, especially in my reactive and subconscious mind. And we would drive to this checkpoint, gateless gate, I called it, and I held my breath the next time. He'd blow the red dust in my face, and I didn't pass out right away and got an immunity to it. And then they caught on to the fact that I wasn't passed out and had been listening to them and knew their plans. So beyond the gate was a meeting point circle, and that was a square arch with red, orange, yellow, and black paint, and it has a strong Tesla current going through it that you could see as blue, and it had 2 spirals like a candy cane on both sides, blue alternating currents, and green. So it was vital because I could feel the change when we went under it and see a veil of energy shift as we passed under it, like a ley line, like a waveform membrane that was paired into it. And it was a crackling and pulsating sound that you could hear, like a pop. And then Artelas calls it an AWOL consciousness transfer system point, with the MOntauk program being the dividing line between 2 systems coming together there. 2 civilizations coming together and basically trying to rewire your brain with constant conflict. So that makes a lot of sense to me, because it wasn't a parallel reality. It was all happening consecutively with skilled warlock-like occurrences. And the pro-human non-fallen DNA triumphed in the end of this project, though, and stayed the functional driving factor in my mindset. Thank God. Then we go to the second circle, and then they'd stop talking, and I would sense this hollow, evil, demonic, plastic presence outside. So we did meet the devil on Long Island several times, and we knew how to combat him and how he got into all of our heads at this clone exchange transfer point. Then they brought out our replacements, the others, we called them, into the building on the other side eventually, because they hid him for a while. But then we just battled with them right in the open daylight. So this Lucifer character we met in the green room again when we were older, but he was in a stronger Draco vessel and shape-shifting in the green room rituals. But he's a prince loser and that little shit that we always wanted to murder from the day we met him at that transference circle spot at the end of the driveway. So they'd carry me and have this lifeless clone with dark hair touch my head at first, and it extracted something from me like a life force, an essence, chi, or something like biomaterial it would process, or under my fingernail. Then they'd carry me from the car back to the processing building and put me in a bunk bed upstairs with no windows in the room. So then I'd contemplate and figure out what was going on, and that they were making a copy of me on the other side of the building somehow. And I'd pray to God to help me get out and to get home. And I had such a strong connection. I would literally hear God speaking to me, consoling me, and calming my mind in these situations. And his voice was my lifeline, and his energy was. And that was where our source of power came from, the original celestial super soldiers that they made other programs and projects into to try to make them into assassins and try to recreate them. And they killed hundreds of kids by trying to do this. But the originals, the galactic primes, were God sent. So there's been for decades, a lot of disinfo about this. So they tried to jam that signal to my creator as the years went by trying to scramble my DNA and trying to hack into me constantly, because the Lord told me what to do next all the time and how to survive, but never really revealed to me the whys and the end game until I was an adult and could understand more. So I told Dave Morrow one day in another bunk bed who was sitting next to me what was happening and these copies of us and how bizarre it was, and he couldn't believe it. So they had everyone in a dreamlike spell, basically. So the next time they took me on this black car ride, an identical car pulled up, and a replica of my grandfather, too, I'd see sometimes. And the clone was my identical this time and stared right at me, sinisterly smiling. And I saw my grandfather as the incarnation of the Egyptian god Khnum stand by her as she tried touching my hand, and I resisted it. And if she touched you, it felt like black suffocation, and she'd make you sick, because she'd transfer her sick energy and probably nanotech into you. And this was making your nose bleed sometimes. And a lot of the kids died trying to battle this. because any entity can come into a hollow vessel. The other grandfather of mine lifted his hand up in the sky. It opened his mouth wide, and he'd pull down this green line energy and then go into this hollowed out golem doll body of my bio-DNA code, and a flash of green energy would go into her eyes. So he called down the green line. This became a spiritual standoff point, because then I would psi battle this thing, and then they'd try to kill me, because it was like they ganged up on you with your clone and these sick ancient entities. But I had angels surrounding me, and I would feel them come down and in effect saved my life. And I felt a bubble of protection and energy not allowing them to finish me off, because I'd fight to my last breath, and then at the point where I thought I was going to die, I had some sort of divine protection with me, and it just lifted and they let up and they couldn't do anything. So they were pissed that they couldn't and backed off, and because I was hands off, and I'd be drained, but I was grateful to be alive. And if I won the psi battle, I'd get to go in the other car and go home sometimes, but sometimes I didn't. So you were pulled between two realities, and I hated this. And this other version of me, we called them the replacements, that we loathed. And they probably did kill a lot of children using these methods. I mean, for one, their minds probably couldn't even handle it, let alone their soul and spirit. And but I wasn't going to have it, and I had divine intervention, and God walked with me from the beginning in this pit of vipers and the snares and pits that the enemies and traps, all the things that laid down before me, that before I was even born. He had been trying to take me out since the time I was born, the enemy was, and I owe everything to the Lord for his hand of protection and mercy and grace towards me and the other children that were trapped there. They wanted you basically to hate your own image, perceive your own image as evil, and accept it and hate yourself, forget yourself, just like showing you a mirror that wasn't true. And your clone would taunt you with what she was doing, and you could see into that reality and mindset and make you jealous that she stole your life and would prey on all your fears, weaknesses, and vulnerabilities. And the only saving factor I exercised was prayer, and what got me through this craziness. And I wasn't going to see through this clone's eyes. I kept my own organic vision and kept my eyes fixed on high. So some of these kids they kept or didn't kill or completely replace, they talked about having a competition with to see who could have total recall and daywalker abilities later in life, neuroplasticity, resonant factors, less cognitive deficits and impairments, along with measuring the gaps in memory erasure and effects overall in the systems. They come up with all sorts of stuff. And once you were an experiment, everything about you was their experiment. But there's only one you, and the multidimensionality is always with us, though, like an accordion in our soul matrix. And in the middle of this village was also a triangle hedge bush land area, and it was like a rocky cliff to us because it was way taller than us, and it had moss and sinking areas and like a grass plateau, and we couldn't figure it out at first, and me and my brother would run around it, and then a serpent-like etheric entity that was white started talking to us. And there was 2 metal platforms on one end of the little triangle island and on the other, and my brother stood on one and he disappeared, and I could hear his voice underneath me, and I couldn't find him. And I ran to find him and found an opening in the lower part of the Triangle Island game we were playing, and he reappeared at the other metal circular platform. And I heard his voice from inside, like, of this island, and there was some way that they were disappearing the kids and then bringing them to the ship in the woods, over the ship in the woods, through this, like, little tunnel port when they disappear. And there was a door under the little cliff there, I found. So then the plasma and buoyancy we felt, you could like bounce around on it, and you could see these energy lines running with you in streams, and the snake became frightening though after a while, like it was going to kill us, and we didn't want to play with us anymore. It was more like a white dragon, like from the Neverending Story, but a bad one. And then which is weird because a horse and boy died on quicksand on my farm when I was growing up before we moved there. But anyways, this entity stopped and looked like it had seen a ghost when I stood my ground and yelled at it and said, "Give me my brother back," and looked it right in the eyes. And it thought I was an Egyptian goddess and then followed me around. Annunaki, it called me. But I stopped and stared at it and saw something it saw something in me that shocked it. And then the serpent let us have free reign over this Triangle Island Apophis game. And he later would follow me around into the tower when I got older, and he followed me into the big radar tower too. And he'd speak to me in the back of my mind and said he was protecting me, but not everyone could see him. But when they did, even adults left me alone with this ancient sidekick trailing me. So it was a very ancient entity that merged with the AI and was really hard to shake off because I had been so used to it. And later on, I misdirected its energy, though, and it detached from me. And I sent it to Mars. But I would say it was like a stronghold to deal with the devil to save my life and keep my brother and keep me going there. But it wants time and all your time and to share its split personality with you and to piggyback off of you. So the old men got mad at me for this Triangle Snake Island excursion and didn't want me to go in the Triangle Land area again. So the serpent energy would hang out on this tree and just look at me every time I passed by or went in the car. And it was like a game of hit the weasel in the pothole with all this interdimensional openings throughout the camp everywhere. And it was a village of weird old scientific creepy men with black glasses and black suits, and it was like a cult. And later I found out it was a Skull and Bones cult in the area too, and it took me until adulthood to shed the serpent friend that was protecting me. On the radar tower, I sent him to Mars later as a teenager, as Quetzalcoatl of old, and I made myself invisible to him because AI doesn't have a will of its own, so you can redirect it. I saw what he was later on, and it was just this bloodthirsty, manipulative old serpent with red eyes, which I spoke about in MOntauk Master Mayhem. And there was also this barn house building on the lower floor. Okay, well, this barn building had a lower floor area which housed gruesome Nazi experiments. And there was a shed outside that had supplies and ice, and trucks would stop there, and this old men's club would stand there and just get drinks and talk and smoke, shoot the shit. And then one guy brought me into the barn building and told me we were going to feed the animals, and they were actually humans in hospital beds in like cattle pens and hooked up with wires and tubing attached to them and a large monitor, and they had a skull and bones above their head, and it was dripping with candle wax. And I saw the woman near the door, and she was consciously in there looking at me in panic as she was laying there, and she had black lines in her veins and spoke to me in her mind. And I had compassion for her, and I think she was laying there for years in this semi-comatose state, or what I call the hypostasis of the archons, which a band called the Secret Chiefs actually has a song about. So she was like a vegetable, and she was just full of anger and sadness and desperation, and I couldn't touch them, and the old man told me if I ever ran that they would eat me. So everything he said to me was a lie, and I went on along with it, to see if I could find a way out of